Okay. Okay, everybody. So you're very welcome to this clinic that we're having for the Literature Bursary Award for 2026. I have a PowerPoint presentation you'll be surprised to hear, and I'm going to put that up on the screen in just 2 seconds, and you'll only be able to see that. The presentation itself should take about a half an hour, maybe a little bit longer. I tend to talk a little bit too quickly, so I'm going to try to slow down. But as I said at the start, my name's Sarah Bannon. I'm the head of literature at the Arts Council. I'm joined by my colleagues Andy McSherry, who's just next to me here, who's literature assistant, and Steffi Kelly, who's literature officer. So say I'm going to make a presentation. We're going to just talk in broad strokes about the Bursary Award, what we do in the Arts Council in the area of literature. I'm not going to get into the technical aspects of making an application, the actual online part of it, because we have a whole other service for that. But this is really about the purposes of this award, the changes that we've made to it recently, and just helping you understand what we're trying to do with this award. Um, there's a little button at the bottom here that says there's a question mark and a little speech bubble, and it says Q&A. And as we're going along, if you have questions, if you want to add them there, Stephanie and Andy are going to be keeping an eye on that. And they're going to scoop up all of those questions. And then at the end, with the three of us, we'll answer those. A lot of times when we give these presentations, the questions get answered as they go through. So I'm not going to stop and look at the questions as we go. But if you want to note them down there, we'll try to answer as many as we can. So without further ado, I will go ahead and start sharing my screen and get into our presentation. So here we go. 2 seconds. Now, here we go. So, as I said, this is an information clinic that we're running here at the Arts Council for the Literature Bursary Award for 2026. As I said, my name's Sarah Bannon. I'm the head of literature at the Arts Council, and Steffi Kelly is literature officer, and Annie McSherry is literature assistant, and we're here to help in any way we can. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is the Arts Council's support for literature more widely. So what we're trying to do in the area of literature. And I just always think this is helpful to just kind of set the scene for what we're doing and how the Literature Bursary fits in. It is just one of the ways that we are supporting writers in writing here in Ireland. So I've done a little Venn diagram here, which shows you that we are offering direct funding in the area of literature, which is our grants and awards to individuals and organizations. So we fund everyone from, publishers to journals to literary festivals to resource organizations. But then we also fund writers in residence, we fund bursaries, we fund projects. Then we also have events and festivals, as I mentioned, that are a way that writers are able to meet one another, take workshops, experience the work of other writers. We also support a lot of mentoring, whether through the national mentoring program that we support with the Irish Writers Centre, or kind of more informal mentoring among writers. And then publication, we support writers through our range of supports for publishers and publications. So as I mentioned, the publishers and journals, we fund upwards of, I think, around 40 publishers and journals in the year 2026. And that's everything from the Singing Fly, who's here, which is a literary journal that focuses a lot of times on new writing, to journals like Winter Papers that just comes out once a year, or Banshee, Poetry Ireland Review, which is just dedicated just to poetry. There's a whole range of these, and the whole purpose of us supporting them is to allow writers the opportunity to submit their work, to have it either accepted or rejected, to have it edited and have it published. And this is how people develop a track record in literary writing. And then festivals and events, they say these are just like a really important way for writers to meet one another, to hear about the process of writing. And it's a way for writers themselves to promote their work up and down the country. And I think there's a literary festival for every weekend of the year here in Ireland. And we're coming into like a busier season now in the springtime. And then we support a range of what we call resource organizations. So in literature, there are several of them. So there's Children's Books Ireland, which focuses, as you might imagine, on children's books. There's the Irish Writers Centre. There's the Munster Literature Centre. There's Poetry Ireland, and then there's Literature Ireland, and that's an organization which is dedicated to the promotion of Irish literature abroad. And each of those organizations are a kind of a mechanism for writers at all stages of their careers to get more support. So when you're not applying for a bursary, or when you're in between publication, or maybe when you have a bursary or you are being published, these are organizations that you might link into to get advice about tax, about how to present your work in a formal setting. They also offer a lot of workshops. They offer publication opportunities in the case of Poetry Ireland and the Munster Literature Centre. But they do a lot of really important work, so we'd really encourage people to check them out. So now that I've said all that, I'm going to move on to the Literature Bursary Award and talk to you a little bit about guidelines for applicants. So here we go. So we've made some changes to the guidelines this year. We've clarified what we mean by a professional writer. We've reintroduced the Emerging Writer Bursary. We've included specific requirements for supporting material for spoken word poets, and we've updated our requirements for supporting materials for comics and graphic novel artists. And then we've used plain language guidelines to update the bursary guidelines this time, because we are conscious that sometimes our guideline documents can be a little bit hard to follow. So we want to make them as easy and clear as possible to avoid any room for mistakes. So one of the questions we get a lot in the Arts Council is, what kind of writing do we support? So we support literature. So what do we mean by that? So we support fiction, poetry, and creative nonfiction. And most people know what this means if you're working in the literary field, but that is usually memoirs and essays. So it's nonfiction work that takes on the characteristics of fiction. So it uses the same kind of literary devices. And we have a number of journals that are dedicated just to creative nonfiction, like Tolka. Dublin Review does a lot of work in this area. The Stinging Fly often has creative nonfiction, as does Banshee. Then we also fund children's fiction and poetry, including illustrated picture books for children. And then we also support original graphic novels and comics. So all those kinds of writing are the kinds of things that we support. So that leads to the next question, which is, what kind of writing don't we support? So we don't support screenwriting. That is the remit of Screen Ireland, who's not us. We don't support journalism. We don't support religious writing, and we don't support professional instructional or academic writing. Those are all outside of our remit. If you're a playwright, of course, we do support playwriting, but that is the responsibility of the theatre team, sadly, rather than the literature team. So if you want to talk about your playwriting needs, you talk to the theatre team, not us. So who is it for, the Literature Bursary Award, and what is it trying to do? So the objective of the English Language Literature Bursary Award is to allow professional literary writers and picture book artists to spend more time on their creative work. Okay? So a lot of people will ask, well, what do you mean by professional? And what we mean by that, and this is all in the guidelines for the awards, but we mean a person who is actively pursuing a career as a literary writer or picture book artist, considers their arts practice to be their main profession or career, is recognized by their peers as a professional practicing artist, and in the case of literature, and this is really crucial, has been published with independent, recognized literary journals or publishers. So you have to have some kind of publication track record with independent, recognized literary journals or publishers. If you haven't had literary work published with a recognized journal or publisher, you're not eligible for the award. Now, there are 3 exceptions to this, and again, this is all in the guidelines. For picture bookmakers, we will consider exhibitions of your work as evidence of your professional literary practice. For graphic novels and for comics, we'll consider self-publication as evidence of professional literary practice. The reason for that is that there are a very limited number of independent publishers for that kind of work in Ireland. And then for spoken word poets, not surprisingly, because this is a spoken art form, we'll consider your experience performing at recognized spoken word events in Ireland as evidence of your track record. Okay? So then people might say, I'm not published. What is there for me? So there still are other supports that you could avail of, just not this particular award. You could explore the National Mentoring Program that's run by the Irish Writers Centre. You could subscribe and submit to the many funded publishers and journals that I mentioned earlier. You could engage with your local authority and arts office and library. They often have opportunities for emerging writers. You should engage with one or more of the literary resource organizations. Everybody should be doing that. You can attend festivals and sign up for workshops. And once you've been published, because there's a reason we're funding all of these journals and publishers, we'll still be here and there'll still be the opportunities. But the important thing is that you develop some kind of track record in professional writing before you apply. So back to the purposes and objectives of the Literature Bursary Award. So as I said, the objective of this award is to allow professional literary writers and picture book artists to spend more time on their creative work. It's intended to enable you to take this time when you're at a critical stage in your writing, to provide you with dedicated time and resources to think, research, reflect, create, and write. So a lot of people ask us, what do you mean by a critical stage in your writing? And then I have this graphic here, which I quite like, and this is my visualization of what we mean by a critical stage in your writing. And I think all writers can identify this with a certain extent, to a certain extent. It would be this image or image of someone on a bicycle, kind of about to get up a hill. So the idea is that you're on this ladder already. You've begun the writing project that you want funding for. You're not at the very, very beginning, but you're at a stage when actually this is the moment. Now is the time that this little push would help me, get a fair wind behind me and enable me to either complete it or get a good chunk of it done. I'm kind of ready to do the work. So it's just and that could be because you're at a certain word count. It could be that you're at a certain stage in your career. Maybe you're moving from one kind of writing to another. But in your own words and in your own opinion, this is a really important time in your career, and that this bursary would enable you to kind of take a leap. The literature bursary isn't the same as something like the basic income for the arts. It isn't just an income substitution, however valuable that is. This is to enable you to look at your writing for a very particular period of time for a very particular purpose. How you articulate that is entirely up to you, and people do it in all kinds of different ways. But the idea is you need to be thinking about your practice and what this bursary could do for you at this particular moment in time. So what's the money for? So we talked about, who it's for. We've talked about, the time that you might need it, or at what point in your career you might do, but what would you use the money for? So as we said, the award seeks to provide you with dedicated time and resources to think, research, reflect, create, and write. So it's as simple as that. It's time to write. And that's usually, and I love this image of this person with spinning plates, it's usually by releasing you from your financial commitments for a period of time. Because we all have things that take up a huge amount of our time, and they're usually things that that allow us to bring in income. So it's to release you for that for a period of time so that you can concentrate on your writing. So this year, and I mentioned this in the beginning, we introduced something called the Emerging Writer Bursary. So this isn't totally new. It's something that we did before. We've reintroduced it. It used to be valued at €3,000. Now it is valued at €7,500. And we're going to aim to award at least 10 of those in each round. Okay. So who is the Emerging Writer Bursary for? So it's for people who've have literary work published with a recognized journal or publisher, because that's a criteria for even applying for the award. But you haven't yet published a collection of poetry or short stories, or a full-length book, a novel, etc. Okay? So it's for people who've published a little in a journal, or maybe the one-off exhibition for the picture book makers, but you haven't yet published a book under your own name. And how much can you apply for? You can apply for a fixed amount for this award. For the Emerging Writer Bursary, as I mentioned, it's €7,500. Then you can apply for, if you've had a full-length book published, you can apply for 10,000, 15,000, or 20,000. Okay? And you have to apply for one of those amounts. We introduced this a number of years ago to try to take the guesswork out of it for writers, because they found it really difficult to judge how much they should be applying for. I'm going to talk about the budget here in a second, but these are the amounts that you can apply for. Our ICT system doesn't demand that you put in one of these amounts, so this is why we say it so many times in the application form, but you have to apply for one of these fixed amounts. So the emerging writer bursary is 7,500. And then if you don't fit into that category, you can apply for one of these three amounts. And how do you determine how much to apply for? So say you know yourself if you're an emerging writer, but if you're not an emerging writer, how much would you apply for? You should choose the amount based on the scale of your proposal and the amount of time that you want to devote to it. Okay. So again, we're leaving it up to you. I will say that in the past, larger bursaries tend to be awarded to those who are more established. That's usually because people have more of a track record. They know how much time it's going to take them, and then they usually score very well on the feasibility within the criteria for the award. And I'll get to that in a second. But you get to choose the amount based on the scale of your proposal and the amount of time that you plan to devote to it. So you've read all that, and now you want to make an application. So what do you do? There are two closing dates coming up. The first is the 12th of February, and then the next one is the 18th of June. You can only apply for one of these, and you can only apply for one bursary per calendar year in any art form. So it's not as if you can apply for this in round one and a dance bursary in round two. It's just one bursary per year. We have two dates because not everybody is ready in the beginning of February, not everyone's ready in June. It's to suit artists and to give people options. So the criteria for the award, and then I'm going to go through these a couple different times, but when you're making your application, the application form itself, I think is pretty self-explanatory with very long guidelines, but there are a series of questions, and all of the questions are going to be looked at in light of these criteria, which are artistic quality. So that's the quality of the work sample that you're going to submit, and also the your artistic track record as demonstrated in your CV. How well your application meets the objectives and priorities of the award. That will go back a lot to that critical time in your writing process. And then feasibility. Can you pull this off? Does your plan make sense? Does it seem like this is something that you can achieve? So there are a number of questions about what you're going to want to do within the application form, and then you're going to come to the budget, which is something that we get a lot of questions about as well. So this is what it looks like. And there's a section that's all about your expenditure. So you'll see there that they're all listed out, your fee to yourself, if there are any mentors or collaborators that you might need to pay, if they're materials, and then if there's any income, that's on the other side. So as we said before, it's just important to remember that the emphasis here is on buying time. So the entire amount you're looking for could be the amount that you want to pay yourself. And I will say that often that is the case with the literature bursary. And often, sorry, just to go back to that, often people don't have income, and that is fine. This form that we're using is, or the budget template is very similar across a lot of our different awards, so it needs to suit lots of different art forms. So for the literature bursary, it tends to be a very simple budget that we receive. So it could be the fee to yourself would be the expenditure, and then there could also be costs that are intrinsic to your time, as we say. So that could be a fee to a mentor or collaborator if you have them. You do not have to have them at all. And then materials, if maybe there are things that you need to purchase to make your writing process go well, like physical things, and that can only be that can be up to 15% of the amount that you're requesting. And as I said before, and I'm saying it again, you can apply for one of these amounts, 7,500, 10,000, that's the emerging writer bursary, 10,000 euro, 15,000 euro, or 20,000 euro. So just the budget, just to say, once you have your expenditure and then you have your income, the difference between those two things is the amount requested from the Arts Council. So it could totally be the case that the amount of expenditure is 7,500 because you're applying for the Emerging Writer Bursary. You have no income, and then the amount requested from the Arts Council will be 7,500. That's like a totally okay budget to have. So, sorry, not to overemphasize it, but just please only apply for one of those amounts. And we say this in the guidelines a bunch of times. If you apply for more than the maximum or less than the minimum, your application is ineligible, and people hate that. If you're requesting an amount other than one of these bands, unless you're applying for disability access costs, which we have someone else that you can talk to about those, any offer we made will be rounded downwards to the lowest band. So if you requested 19,500, the maximum we could award you is 15,000. So that seems very unfair. So that's why we're saying it here. So just please, please, please just apply for one of those amounts. So you've done your application, you've done your budget, and now there's the mandatory supporting materials. So this part's really important. Again, this is all in the guidelines. So we ask for your CV. It's your artistic CV, which highlights your achievements as a professional artist. So we want that to be no more than 3 pages. And that's a really important part of your application and should detail your track record as a writer and a picture book artist. Okay. And then the next piece, and this is also a really essential part of your application, it's the work in progress. And I will say that both are at shortlisting phase and the peer panel phase, which I'll talk about in a little bit. This is a really important part of what the panels and the assessors look at when assessing your application. So the work must not have been previously published and it must relate specifically to your proposal. And then we have additional guidance, which I'm going to talk about in a second, about what you should be submitting based on the kind of writing that you're doing. So if it's prose, it's up to 4,000 words of a work in progress for which the application is being made. It should be in 12-point font and double spaced. For poetry, we're looking for 10 pages of poetry, single spaced, with no more than one poem per page. For children's and picture book artists, it's 10 images or pages that relate specifically to your bursary proposal, including a sample text. If it does have text, they don't always. And you should also include up to 5 images that demonstrate your illustration practice to date. If you have a dummy book available, you should submit that as well. And then finally, for comics and graphic novels, it's a 5-page sample of the work in progress and a 10-page sample of previously published work that demonstrates your practice. And for spoken word poets, 10 pages of poetry single space with no more than one poem per page. And we want 1 to 3 links to a video recording of your performance work, no longer than 10 minutes. So for professional writers, I'm sure for all of you here, these are not kind of unusual requirements. And the fact that we're being very specific about the format of it, again, is not unusual for when you're submitting to agents or to journals or publishers. But it's just important to look at this carefully because I will say, when panels look at the work, it stands out if people don't necessarily follow this guidelines and it makes you look maybe less professional than your competitor applicants. So finally, you can also submit extracts of previously published work if it's available, but it mightn't necessarily be read. Those 2 pieces are the most important part. Where you're going to be working with other people or organizations, you should submit some biographies outlining their expertise. If a sample, like from a novel, if you're like putting in a prose piece, if you think it requires some explanation or some kind of context, you should provide that as well. For biographic, there's a section in the application form where we ask you to tell us about yourself. And sometimes people think, oh, well, that's kind of covering the CV, but maybe I won't put in a CV as well. That doesn't count as your CV. And if you don't put in your CV, your application will be made ineligible. The supporting materials that you submit, they have to be separate and additional to your application form. And as I said before, there are going to be a lot of people reading this, so make sure your documents are readable and clear. So now you've made your application well ahead of the deadline. What next? Well, we'll acknowledge your application. Then we'll undertake an eligibility check. We'll make sure that you have some professional experience as a writer. We'll make sure that you've applied for a correct amount. We'll make sure you have your work in progress and your CV. And then once all of those are ticked, it will go on for assessment. So the process for assessment, and again, this is in the guidelines near the back, is first we have a shortlisting process. So the Arts Council engages a literature advisor who also engages a number of other assessors, and they get a virtual copy of all the applications and supporting material, and they shortlist the applications against the criteria. And the criteria, just to remind you again, are artistic quality, how well the application meets the objectives of the award, and feasibility. Then the shortlisted applications are sent on to a peer panel. So the peer panels for the Literature Bursary Award and for all of our awards of this type are put together of people working in the field. For the Literature Bursary Award, we usually have 4, and I think it's going to be up to 5 this coming year, individuals who have expertise in the area of literature, kind of practicing writers and literary professionals. So usually what that looks like is, a prose fiction writer, a poet, usually a children's writer, illustrator, someone who has expertise in, say, in illustration or comics, graphic novels, and then maybe a person who's like an editor or an all-rounder. And then within that, we usually try to have someone who isn't from Ireland, so they don't really necessarily know all the people there. So the peer panel, they get all the shortlist applications ahead of time, they read them, they make notes, and then they have a meeting where they discuss all of the applications against the criteria. And then at the end of the meeting, they score the applications. There's an A, which is must fund, B is should fund, C is could fund, and D is not a priority for this award. Each panelist gets each application a letter. Each letter has a number. Those numbers are added up. And then the highest scoring applications are awarded funding, and they award funding until they run out. And then those decisions are sent out to the applicants and they're noted by the Arts Council, but it's the peer panel who's really making the decisions in the end. So as I said before, a million times, the criteria are artistic quality, how your application meets the objectives and priorities of the award, and feasibility. We usually issue our decisions in about 16 weeks. It can be longer depending on the volumes of applications, or if there's a hiccup with our online system, but that's usually what we try to do. So it does take a long time. The reason it takes a long time is we get a lot of applications and there's a lot of reading, and we want to give every application a fair shake. So just to give you a sense of the numbers and how competitive it is, in round one of last year, we had 281 applications. We shortlisted 82. We were able to fund 47. In round two, we had 203 applications. We shortlisted 73 and we were able to fund 38. So it is a really, really competitive award. I will say the number of applications we've been able to fund over the years has increased dramatically, but still it's not what it's still around, 15%. So after your decision, just to remember that everything's assessed in a competitive context. We always receive a lot more quality applications than we're in a position to support. You should ask for your assessment. We'll give you the opportunity to get a copy of that. I'd encourage you not to get discouraged. I myself am very poor with rejection of any sort, so I have great empathy for people when you aren't supported. But it's just to remember that this is, it's public money, it's part of a process, and you can always come back again. But I'd also encourage you to reach out to the organizations mentioned at the top of the meeting. A bursary is obviously really important. We think it's a really valuable award, but it's not the end all be all. And there are other supports available to you that you could avail of and then come back to us at a later time. The common mistakes that people make with their application is that they miss the deadline. Maybe they leave it too late. Maybe they don't upload supporting material or upload the wrong supporting material. Someone once put up a recipe rather than their CV. Not reading the guidelines, providing a sample without context, or work that doesn't show you your best. So that work in progress, even though it is just a work in progress, it needs to be polished and good and showing you your best. And also then I think a common mistake is that sometimes people apply before they're ready. And maybe they aren't at that critical stage. They're just kind of bashing it in to try to develop an opportunity, which of course I understand, but it is a really competitive award and we want to support people who are absolutely at the right time to receive the support. So finally, we recommend that you aim to upload your application at least 48 hours before the deadline. That way, if you have a problem, you can contact us and we can resolve it. And then, yeah, we get a lot of applicants using the online system on the very last day. So we can't resolve that we can't guarantee that we'll resolve a technical issue if you contact us after 2 p.m. on the day of deadline. That's literally 3.5 hours before it closes. So my advice is to pretend like the deadline is a little bit earlier than it is, like a day or two earlier. That way you can get rid of all of this stress. So there are technical questions we have on our website. There's FAQs for using online services. There's an email address for that. And there's a YouTube guide to making online applications. If you have non-technical questions about the award, you can contact us at literature@artscouncil.ie. You'll get all three of us. And then for disability access, you contact disabilityaccess@artscouncil.ie. This is all on our website as well, which is www.artscouncil.ie. And now I'm going to stop sharing. I said it would take half an hour. It is exactly 1:30. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and we're going to start to take some questions. Okay, So I know I sped up talking Steffi and Andy at the end, but
Yeah,
shall we go to the questions to begin with? Is
sure.
that
We've been
okay?
answering some of the more straightforward ones just directly as we were going through the
Okay.
presentation. So I'll start calling out some
Yeah.
now that might need more kind of direct answers from yourself.
Perfect.
One says it's in relation to the emerging writer bursary.
Hmm.
They're asking if a 30-page chapbook of five short pieces that won a literary award counts as published in that context.
Yeah, it probably depends on who published the chapbook, but that sounds probably about right. You can get in touch with us directly for it, but that
For more
sounds,
information about
yeah,
the
that sounds like an
specifics.
emerging writer bursary. Yeah.
Great. And then I have a few about kind of clarifying what's meant by recognized journal or publisher. So
Okay.
kind of, I guess, where's the
I
distinction
get,
there is what people are
yeah, I
asking.
mean, I guess it's not yourself. It's not, I mean, and I totally value self-publication as a I think that's, becoming an increasingly important way for people to get their work out there. But I suppose the Arts Council has invested in a range of independent publishers for a reason that we think there's a value in people getting editorial expertise and working with someone else. I mean, if it has an ISBN, it is, and if it is not published by yourself, it probably is. But if people are wondering if where they've been published isn't recognized, I think coming to us and asking us one to one is probably the best way to go about that. You probably will know that it's a recognized publisher. Do you know? That's my, but you can come to us with any questions on that. We don't mind at all.
Yeah. And then a few people are also asking kind of about that track record in having been published. Maybe they've been
Yeah.
published in one type of literary form, like nonfiction or poetry, but they're actually proposing maybe fiction or something
Yeah,
else.
that's okay. That's
The
okay.
transfer is
They
fine.
can still apply. Yes, absolutely.
Gosh.
Yes.
And then um, someone's asking if you have been published, in literary journals, but it's been maybe over 10 years, does
That's
that still
okay.
count? Yeah.
It does. It does. And I have great empathy for that myself. So yeah, no, absolutely. Once you're published, you're published.
Yeah. And people are also asking maybe about, say, they have a book coming out next year or they have a book deal, but the books aren't finished. Does that count as?
Yeah, they need to wait until something has actually been published before they apply. I mean, usually if someone has a full-length book coming out, they've had something small published somewhere, so they could still apply for the emerging writer bursary within that. But yeah, until that full collection is out, we're gonna stick to that.
Great. Sorry, lots of these
And as I
words.
say, we'll still be here, and the bursary's been running since the 1970s, so it's not going anywhere immediately.
Can you apply as a writer in multiple forms, i.e., poetry and memoir? And if so,
Yeah.
should you include examples of each in your supporting materials?
Yeah, you can do that. You can do that. I mean, absolutely. And people have done that before. And sometimes the panel will say, "Oh, they're trying to do too much," or sometimes they're more interested in one than the other. But you can absolutely do that, and it's yeah, that's absolutely fine. And every panel is different, and they respond to all work differently too. Um,
Yeah, let me see. Does this
I'm
also
not.
cover Northern Irish writers if their writing is related to Republic of Ireland?
Yeah, so there's some specific guidance in the guidelines around this. If you are not based in if you're not a resident of the Republic of Ireland, you should make clear in your application, but you think that your work is relevant to the arts in the Republic of Ireland, you need to make clear in your application how it would be and how that would work. So that would apply to someone who is applying from, say, Bucharest or someone who's applying from Belfast. It's the same kind of test. And again, this is a little bit like the recognized journals. If you have specific questions around or you're a bit unsure, you can contact us ahead of time and we can try to help you out. A lot of it will come down to the application itself, though.
My illustrations have been published online by recognized institutions such as the NHS, and as a book cover, do these instances count as publications?
Um, maybe I'm not sure. So they might, in that case, it might be a good idea to get in touch with us and they could link us to it and we could make a call that way. Um, but yeah, we'd used an exhibition of the work as being an example of that. But if they're in, and I suppose if without getting into too much to the person's query, there's a difference between someone who's writing um, ad copy and someone who's, writing new creative work. And there's a difference between doing graphics for a commercial purpose and for creative work as well. So you need to show that you have experience in working in this in the literary space as opposed to the non-literary space, if that makes sense. But again, we're happy to tease it out with them. I think a lot of times where when people are a little bit uncertain about their eligibility, and it's not to discourage people from applying, but it can kind of reveal that like maybe there's like a little bit more work to be done before you apply. But again, feel free to come to us to ask some questions about it.
Um, if you were submitting a verse novel, would you follow the prose guidelines or the poetry guidelines?
Ooh, that's a good question. Um, I would go, I would actually go with the pros because you'd get a bit more. I think you'd get more but it depends on the format of it. We're not going to throw that out for it being too long for the poetry. Yeah, I might go for the pros there. They can use their own judgment. I think it might work out the 10 pages. It could be 10 poems if they're individual poems. Um, I I think they should follow their own their own compass on that and maybe err out a little bit more than less. But we've
And
never had that question before. That's funny, isn't it? That's a good one.
um, and similar, what supporting material is required for picture book writers who do not illustrate their work?
Yeah, that's tough. So I think definitely with that, it's really important to have that previously published work, submitted as well, so you can see a copy of the text. And then I think it depends on if you have the full text of something ready to go, or if you have kind of a short text or a sample of it, submit that. But I think yeah, I mean, not more than 4,000 words, but it probably isn't going to be 4,000 words. It probably is a bit more like a poem. To submit what you think is a good, reasonable sample of it. It's very hard with just the written work with the picture book, and maybe you have a few things on the go at once. But I think the previously published work is really important there, and probably as much text as you can.
Yeah, someone was also asking if the submission is for children but is illustrated creative nonfiction, what material is needed?
I think well, I would go for if they're just doing, are they only doing the writing? If they're only doing the writing, I would do again, if it's creative nonfiction, it's the prose guidelines. If they're doing the illustrations, do the illustrated picture books guidelines.
Let's see, trying to group them together. Um, does experience in playwriting count, or is it irrelevant in terms of CV, bio? Maybe it depends
I
on
mean,
if you have anything else.
I think if you've not written um, outside of for the theater, I would think get some experience in writing prose or poetry or that before applying for the literature bursary. That would be important, I think. Obviously, it's transferable in real life, but for the purpose of the literature bursary to kind of prove that you are a professional in this space, I think, as opposed to being a playwright, I think you'd need to have some kind of published work, as I say, with either a journal or a publisher, to fulfill that.
Any ideas on what to do if previous assessment reports said it was a strong application but didn't give kind
It,
of suggestions on where to improve?
I would maybe talk, it depends on where that's good. I mean, that's a good sign. That just means it was a competitive context, And so I always encourage people if they can to get another writer friend to maybe take a look at the application or the work in progress and make sure that that's an absolutely really strong piece. You can also reach out to the resource organization. Sometimes they can give you kind of a steer on strengthening it there. But yeah, I would just have one of your writer peers, maybe take a look at the work in progress you're submitting and yeah and bounce that off, but I that's a good sign, and as I say, usually that it just means that the environment was too competitive. Just to say to everyone on the call, where this is like a new format for us in the webinar format, so I'm really finding it weird that I can't see everyone's faces, so I'm kind of missing that. I mean, it's lovely to see Andy and Steffi, but I hope that this doesn't feel too impersonal. But this is the way we're doing it now. So, but I hope this is okay for people. And again, you can always email us at literature@artscouncil.ie if there are things. Sorry, Steffi, you have more questions.
Yeah. Uh, so what is the difference between this award and the Agility Award?
Oh, good question. Well, we haven't uh, finished the agility guidelines for 2026 yet, but last year, and I have a feeling, I have a hunch that the agility is going to be very similar to as it was last year. Last year, the agility was only open to artists who had never been funded by the Arts Council before. Whereas this is obviously open to people who've been funded before. So, and one of the reasons that we reintroduced the Emerging Writer Bursary was that we felt like there was still a gap between people who are still emerging but have been funded before. And we wanted to offer a kind of a safe or kind of a ring fence budget almost for people to make sure that we were still funding people at the beginning of their careers within the bursary. And it didn't end up just being people who'd never been funded and then very established people over in the bursary. So I probably should have talked about that more in the presentation. But yeah, the agility last year, and I imagine it will be this way this year, was for people who've never been funded before.
And someone else had been asking if the Agility Award was gone, so we
I
anticipate it will still be
no,
running.
it's in our funding schedule, so you can see it. You can see it there, and hopefully we'll do like we can do another kind of. There'll probably be an overall clinic about that award close to the closing date.
Yeah, someone was asking for kind of clarification on the previously published work because I had told someone else that it's not required in most cases for the additional samples, except
Yeah,
for comics and spoken
yeah,
word and children's
and I
picture books.
think yeah, and it's to kind of use your judgment on it. So you saw the numbers there too, that like, there's like 280 applications in round one of last year. Everyone's putting in a 10-page sample, they're putting in a 3-page CV, there's the application form itself. So it's to kind of think about what would be the purpose of putting in something additional. uh, and I think for comics and for picture books, it can be hard to get a handle on someone's practice based on just a few images and that, and that's why the previously published work is really essential. But say you're a novelist or a short story writer, you can get across what you're trying to do in 4,000 words pretty well, and people might be familiar with the books and the reviews and that kind of thing from looking at your CV. So putting in a PDF of a previously published novel is really not useful at all. And I just don't think that's going to be feasible for an assessor or a panelist to read. So having a really sharp CV that outlines all the things that you've done and all the awards you've received in the many places that you've been published, that's really, really getting that right and getting your sample of work a really, really strong, again, like polished sample is probably more important than trying to load on additional pieces to the application.
Let me see. Someone's asking, can we apply for both? And I think that probably means the agility and the bursary, which
Um,
is you can't
I,
receive both is normally how that works.
yeah, you can apply for both, but you can't receive both. So. Yeah, and since we haven't outlined the guidelines for they're just, yeah, they're separate. So you can apply for both, but not receive both.
Um,
Um,
so, people are kind of asking about um, how many publications are considered track record for emerging writers. So is having one
could
journal
just,
publication enough, and
yeah,
can it
yeah,
be online?
it could literally be one. Yeah,
Yeah.
it could be,
Other questions
yeah.
are, could they be online publications? And what if those publishers are no longer publishing? Things like that.
It would, I mean, it would probably depend on how reputable the online publication was, do you know, and they might have a feeling for that themselves and like the kinds of work that they were publishing. If a publisher has stopped publishing now, that's not a problem if they were a legitimate publisher. So again, like sometimes I think if people are struggling with the borderline, it's just to maybe take a look around, maybe ask even if it's poetry, ask Poetry Ireland what their thought is on that. And if there's, if you're a prose writer, ask the Irish Writers Centre or the Munster Literature Centre. I think get advice from those as well. And you can always come to us and ask too. But if you're not sure, that could be a sign that you maybe need to submit a bit more and get your work out there a bit more.
Mm.
Um,
Yeah, and there's some questions about reapplying. So
yeah,
someone received an
yeah,
agility award to research and prepare for a novel, but was unsuccessful in their bursary application to do the writing. Can they reapply for the same
yeah.
if?
Yeah, so you can reapply for the same kind of project or writing proposal. You need to show that your application has kind of moved on in some kind of way. So usually people put in like a more developed sample or, a different piece, or you acknowledge like time has moved on since you last made your application. So it's not going to, not to be like too philosophical, but like I'm not the same person today as I was a year ago. So, you're applying as yourself and the project will have moved on. So that is fine. But you do need to show that you're not just lopping in the same application again.
And I think that should also answer a question from someone else who would like to reapply, but their feedback didn't give them specific things to change, just to kind of keep
Yeah.
developing it.
Yeah, exactly. Um, and I can see, I can see questions now too. So I'll
We have
come as
10
you're
still
looking for
open.
yeah, if you're looking for one, I can answer another one. Or do you want to?
Um,
Someone wanted to know if there's a list of recognized journals or a stipulation of what that means. Like there's a list of those that we fund that isn't every recognized journal. But again, as I say, I think the publishers and or the resource organizations would be good to talk to. Um, I mean, I think if it's an independent, non-vanity publisher, where you yourself are not paying to have your work funded, that's a kind of work that we would not consider to be legitimate publication. Self-publication, we wouldn't consider, but most things outside of that probably are. If you have a third party editor, like someone else who's working with you on your work, you got paid for the work, that's professional. I think things outside of that are less clear. And again, I think you'd be better to try to submit maybe to some of the publications or journals that we support. All the resource organizations have links to all the publishers and journals. Books Ireland does a publication every year, which is like the Irish Writers Handbook, and they have a lot of really good advice there that you could look at.
I've answered two questions. Um, Someone's asking, so for picture books, can they submit the dummy book instead of 10 individual images or in addition to the images? Because they're saying the dummy book would combine both anyways. So would that be their main work in progress as opposed to?
That could be their yes. But then they should have previous practice. So they have the dummy book and the
Mhm.
previous practice. Yeah. Um,
Yeah, so picture books are one of the forms where we ask for a little bit extra work samples, previous work
um,
samples.
yeah.
Um, if you've been funded by an Agility Award before, is it useful to refer to this and its impact? It go on your
Yeah.
CV?
I don't know I mean, I think it's relevant, and I think it shows probably feasibility. And do you know what I mean? Like if you've done if you've done this before, and that you know what you're doing, I think that's good. Um,
Yep. And if I've been published by mainstream publishers, albeit in non-fiction, and also have an agent, does this mean I should apply for emerging or non-emerging?
um,
If my
but it depends on if it's creative nonfiction as well, I suppose. I mean, if it's non-literary work, then you may not be, then you may not be eligible for this at all. You know what I mean? If it's totally outside of the Arts Council's remit in terms of writing, so it depends on if it was creative nonfiction, then absolutely you can apply for the for 10,000, 15, or 20. But if it's not literary work, and you're just kind of changing gears, I think that's a different story. And so again, you might want to submit some short pieces to journals and that before you apply for the bursary.
someone would like kind of an expansion on what's kind of meant by how your proposal would benefit the arts in the Republic of Ireland in relation
Oh.
to being ordinary
Yeah, I
residents
mean,
outside.
often it's someone who's very yeah, who does a lot of work here, who maybe does like workshops here, who comes and to a lot of festivals here. Maybe the work is very much about Ireland of today, so it could be anything. Sometimes it's an Irish writer who doesn't live here anymore, but it comes back and forth a lot and is very much considered an Irish writer. So it's pretty open. Um, but yeah, it does have to be explained, and the kind of the onus is on you as the applicant to make that case within the application form. You need to demonstrate there's, but that's usually it's just that someone is does a lot of work with festivals. They maybe they teach workshops here. Maybe the work is very much set in Ireland. It could be anything like that.
Yeah. A few people are asking, I guess, for kind of final confirmation on eligibility and self-publishing. So people's,
Uh,
someone asks if they're self-publishing their books are selling in bookshops and online, are they still ineligible?
E- if they've never if they've never been published by anyone else or in any kind of journal, yeah, still you'd need to wait until you've actually been published in a journal, until you've actually been published by a publisher. Yeah, that would generally be the case. Um, y- yeah, that's how it's been framed.
And,
Um,
and similarly, someone's asking, they have self-published something, a small collection, but it
yeah.
was the result of winning a local, I assume in a local authority bursary.
Yeah, still not
Yeah.
yet with us, but I mean, I think again, there's like there are all those journals that we're supporting. There's the Irish Writers Centre, there's Poetry Ireland, there are other places. Um, the next question I can see is an emerging poet who hasn't been funded before, but is working for a first pamphlet or collection. Um, it's just again with this person, probably the Agility Award, but again. It's if I hope you'd need to have been published somewhere with like a poem or two in a journal before you'd apply for this. Even for the Agility Award, you'd need to have some kind of publication track record. So yeah, probably the Agility Award if you've not been funded before. But it would be your own call. You can take a look at the two of them and see what you think. Um,
And then is it helpful to reference if you've received funding in from the Arts Council in a different medium, i.e. music? It doesn't hurt,
would it be
but
helpful? Yeah, it doesn't hurt. I don't know that it helps hugely. It because they're totally different and they'd be looked at by a different group. Oh my gosh, we're on our last question, guys, which is great
yeah.
timing, isn't it, Steffi? This is the last one. Yeah, I
Yep,
think
so my
so.
work is non-fiction and takes the form of cultural commentary on contemporary life in Ireland with some essay-style writing and a one-page comic strip at the end of each chapter. It is reflective. Does this type of work fall within the criteria for the literature bursary?
It's sounds it sounds
in
Possible.
creative
I mean,
nonfiction.
it sounds creative. It sounds like creative nonfiction. Again, like until we see the work, it's hard to tell. But yeah, I think it would. It doesn't sound ineligible. But again, you would have to see the work before we'd know for sure. And if you think it's, maybe to take a look around at what you think creative nonfiction is, or to see the creative nonfiction that we're talking about and make sure that you think that that fits into it. But I'd say that could be okay. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
that
that is
does
us, I
sound.
think, actually.
Also, at some
So
point,
it,
someone said thank you for reintroducing the Emerging Writer
Oh,
Bursary.
that's great. Well, listen, thanks to everybody for coming along. It is 5 to 2, so I'm going to close this out in a second. But just to say thank you very much. We are at literature@artscouncil.ie if you want to follow up with any other questions. And we really appreciate everyone's attention. It's very weird not to see everyone on the Zoom, and I hope that was helpful. But yeah, thanks so much. And any questions, just come and best of luck with your writing and reading. So I'm going to end this now. Bye.